Good afternoon, everybody. The second session after lunch, so hopefully the food is digested. I haven't digested mine, but as the Sholay dialogue would go, minute 25 आदमी तीन बहुत बेइंसाफी है. But I think we shall try to be crisp, hopefully, and I shall try to be moderate, being the moderator. So I'm going to just let people talk. The session's title says Corporate Leaders, the Custodians of Brand Reputation Management. And I thought corporate leader is a vague term because everybody is a corporate leader from assistant vice president upwards these days, not to speak of trainees with ambitions. But I think we'll have to think of CEOs, or the corner office, or maybe CXOs or C-suites, because that is when we're going to distinguish this panel from the rest of the general branding talk that we hear all day and in the industry. That's rule number one. The rule number two is, of course, the fact that we are trying to see a delta, a change in the industry or the idea of branding. So we're going to explore some ideas of change, and hopefully we'll wake up the audience by coming up with some tips and tricks that might be useful for them. I have, of course, a very eminent panel. I have to say, Suri is from Australia, so he's also a consultant, so he's sort of out of a functional role in any one particular company, and he's out of the country, so he brings us a different perspective, hopefully different ideas. And then Samir was just in Star Sports, so he's dripping media. He's with Daily Hunt, which is a very cool app, I'm told. And of course, Sanjeev, who retains the charm of the old world Maruti in a new world avatar. So we shall get the ball rolling. I'm going to first ask a general question. Maybe Sanjeev, we can begin there. How is branding today different from what it was, let's say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? What has changed in a manner that seeks to redefine the rules of the game? We know a part of it from the previous panel, We are living in post-truth, post-social media world. But I'd love to see a big picture understanding of what's out there before we zero in on other issues.
It's a very interesting question to begin with. Branding, to me, having seen 18 plus many years of experience in my life, I haven't seen branding change so much. Branding, the only change that you see is actually from a black and white to a color. 30 years.
That is very counterintuitive. I thought you would say the world has completely changed. This is life after Google, Facebook, and what is that? FANG. Amazon, Netflix, Google, whatever.
No, that you can say that branding would have changed for many of these eminent writers who would say that, we need a reason to put a version 2, a version 3, a version 4, a version 5. And we have heard about branding 2.0, branding 3.0 may come up. These are all terminologies, but if you go to the essence of branding, I don't think branding's changed. For example, have I changed my name? We have not. Has Maruti changed the name? We have not. Is that not a brand?
You sound terribly old work like myself. It's just as I think I just saw Nilanjana say, it's 101 at some point. So journalism 101 is still about what, where, when, which, and how, and I think brand is also about that. But I do believe, just as things have changed in the age of fake news or social media, something has changed. Let me throw that question to Raj. Do you really believe things haven't changed? The essence hasn't changed, but surely the way you do it has changed? Oh.
Well, I think I agree to some extent with Sanjeev. The branding has not changed, but we are reinventing branding. So, that's a contradiction itself. So, for example, I find the CEO today is also the chief marketing officer of his style of brand working in a corporate environment. And I find that to be quite interesting because there are, CEOs out there who are not on social media that often. But I see, especially in Australia, that CEOs are talking about their personal philosophy, which is actually in sync with the company they work for. And I think that's a classic sort of a great solution there, without getting caught in, I think, Sanjeev, we were talking earlier on, that you are running a big corporate and you could be sort of answerable on something loose coming out of your Twitter handle. But at the same time, if you take a CEO is taking his dogs for a walk in the park, and he talks about something about, I learned something from today looking at the leaves fluttering, and that sort of helped me to shift my mind away from just not achieving things on a daily basis. And that sends a good signal to his team that really he is human after all, and he's a good leader, because that's very inspirational for your
interesting.
team.
So the interesting takeaway from that is the CEO is also willy-nilly now a brand ambassador. She always was, but we now have, thanks to social media, both the opportunity and the challenge of being present somewhere. I mean, obviously, we were discussing even before the session began the roles of Harsh Goenka or Anand Mahindra, who become test cases on, or Kiran Mazumdar Shah, who's there. But not every CEO can do it. So let me throw that at Samir. You know, not everyone can carry off a canary yellow jacket. So every CEO, many of them are full of gravitas, no?
Actually, my answer lies between both of them in some ways. In some ways, I believe brands not changed. But I think now, as a marketing person, or as a CEO, or in general, I believe now the brand has so many more moments in which it has to be true. So imagine like a 10-year-old ago, if a Maruti car delivered on performance, on mileage, that's the brand it built. Today, imagine for him, his brand ambassador may go out and tweet something, which is not in his control eventually. So the number of times a brand now needs to be true across social media, across content, across PR, across advertising, that puts a lot of pressure. So at that level, branding continues, its manifestations have changed, but it's a lot more difficult now to run a brand.
Yeah, I love the way you use the word brand has to be true, because what I have said before in many places, I now write a column for Reputation today from a journalistic point of view, is that brands were always about reputation, but for 100 years almost, you could control a good portion of it through a communication strategy in which the technology provided a certain, walled garden of sorts where you could control the information or control the flow. But now it's become something what I call the squash court. You hit the ball here, it might come back to you from another point, like a ricochet, and therefore from reputation it went to recall, but the brand values now come back to reputation. And to that extent, just as fake news has to be fought on the journalistic side, through the packaged, positioned, projected brand has to be more true in the new age. But the question is, how do you do it? So let me ask a slightly difficult question. Maybe I can go to Raj here. This whole millennial phenomenon, where a bunch of pampered, you might say, you can see from my hair or lack of it, or people, they love to wear all their opinions on their sleeves. They call themselves not judgmental, but most of the time they are being judgmental, and brands go to hell because of that. On everything from Indigo Airlines to, Ambani wedding, everything gets discussed. So is there a challenge in dealing with the millennials from a CXO point of view?
Look, I'll tell you a little story. I'll answer that. But I deal with sort of a lot of small businesses in Australia. And there are SMEs, there is small business. Because in Australia, what the data says is that the real growth engine in the economy is the small business. And of course, the corporates are there, but they can be only those many big multinationals or big corporates. The driver for employment, and as well as getting more people into the interaction of the businesses, there are chambers, so small business is really there. So there was a client who is my client, and they were really baby boomers. So they started a principal real estate company, which is national, but it is a franchise model. And these guys were reluctant to even come, let alone having a social media presence, even come on the camera. Their argument was that people know X, Y, Z, they will come to us. but they're executives who are from 25 to 35-year-old. And there are even younger ones. There are real estate people. And these guys were built on social media. They were creating their own pages. They were going out and vlogging. You know, they have to sell properties, and they will start talking about the properties. And they were not controlled by the top. And this started going from bottom to the principals. And finally, the principals jumped on the bandwagon, and they called us, and they said, look, we would want you to brand us because we want to know what these guys are doing. But of course, it's a different take. So they were actually undervaluing their experience. So the key here is, I find that when you have not grown up like the millennials have, you are undervaluing your experience.
I get your point. I think you've indirectly answered my entire question, that the millennials are so different, both in terms of your competitors, even if they are not your customers. As competitors, they're going to change the landscape. And to that extent, the CXO or the CEO has to be responsible. So let me hit the CEO angle here from a large perspective. Because can you imagine, or have you had any conversation, Sanjeev, with your CEO on how the world has changed? I know you know that brands haven't changed, but I'm sure you must have had some.
Yeah, not to be quoted, but yes, you have to keep driving in the point that the world outside is changing. That's part of the game that you're coaching the CXOs, or you're speaking to them. As marketeers, as communicators, I think the challenge to us is how do we communicate to this new generation which wants things in snacks and bites and not meals. They want things to be served fast, things to be served differently. Communication to be quick and there, and don't build a story around it, just tell me what is it net. So imagine a CXO who would have been used in the era, come up the ages where he would have narrated a story and then given an example and given and the audience there is just saying, come to the point. Why aren't you just hitting the nail where you have to hit it?
Yeah, so there is from a test match approach, you switch to a T20 approach too.
It's going beyond T20 now. I think it's like, let's just have a bite here and a bite there.
Also, I'll add there, Sanjeev, because what happens is that it becomes very authentic when the CEO comes across and says something there, then you're really hearing from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Exactly. In fact, like you rightly said, so the thing is about connect. The thing is about how do you connect with the audience. So you keep the audience in mind and you connect with them in the way they want to hear things. The connect is instant.
Yeah, but let me take Samir on that, because it's not just about connect from one side. It was always a two-way connect, but now you have, as we saw in the previous session, you deal with everything from upset customers to mob movement and flash mobs and what I call a vector dynamic where somebody will come back and bite at you. So how do you control the brand's image, or control is perhaps not the best way, but obviously we all want control. So is there a way, is there a do or don't that you would recommend for a CXO or a CEO?
I think from a do and don't point of view, I think there are a couple of instances which come to mind lately. For example, I'm just going to go off book a bit and quote the Zomato experience, the Zomato problem that just happened.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fabulous example of how the Zomato team has replied firmly, fast, and being authentic. In the sense, they put their hand up and said, you know what, we try our level best, but this happened. They came back and said, you know what, we apologize for it. Third, they came back and said, you know what, this is what we'll do to, ensure that doesn't happen again. So in a lot of ways, again, it's about being honest, because what's happened has happened. And what happens with young people, and I'm saying that purely because as a platform, Daily Hunt, gets 130 million, 140 million people a month coming to it, and a majority of them are young people. They don't give you a lot of chances. So if you're not, authentic with them, if they find you fake at that level, not being honest, I think the judgment passes around very fast.
Very interesting. That's again, err on the side of truth is the takeaway. But Sanjeev, I have an interesting question for you, because he said something just down your street, which is that when a Zomato delivery boy acts in a certain way, there is obviously there's a pushback on the brand. It can happen to an Ola driver partner, as they call. Increasingly, service brands are more vulnerable, and services are critical even for, let's say, a brand like Maruti, where you have after-sales service becomes a very important component. So your there is a very interesting 360-degree approach to this whole thing, where social media on the one hand amplifies and, manages the flow of message. On the other hand, you also have a multiple stakeholder approach where your investors, your analysts, apart from media and advertisement, you have customers, everybody talking to each other and from you. So I remember you facing a workers' agitation in the recent years. I don't know whether you handle that. I'd love to see you talk about that. What does it mean to balance interests of multiple stakeholders so that overall truth remains where it is?
See, that's multiple of at least 4 questions in one. So I'll try and answer the last one first. Coming to the workers' agitation 2013, I think it's been a learning experience and a humbling experience for us. But I think what sailed us through and took us from where we were to where we are today, virtually every second car sold is a Maruti today, is the fact that we were transparent, we were very committed, we communicated very clearly to one and all, not just the internal stakeholders, not just the external, but also the internal. For us, both external and internal are both equal. So it's very imperative that not just the external guys understand what we are saying, but the internals empathize with it. And that's what happened. And the fact that, as a CXO, I think Samir said that very clearly. Authenticity, trust, being clear, being grounded are some of the virtues that a CXO will have to connect with the customer.
Samir,
Customer today is really looking at transparency purely. If I'm transparent and say, like you said, I'm sorry, mistakes happen. How can I correct it for you?
So
That saves that 360-degree go around.
So let's take a mid-session stock of the lessons we've learned. So CXOs have to be true, they have to be human, so that they are perceived in a good, positive association with the brand. And the third is they have to manage all stakeholders together in an authentic way, which is separate from being true, meaning it's a balancing act as opposed to just being true to yourself. But what are the tricks to do this? You have any tricks, Samir? Or tricks, or what I call a toolkit, or something that you would tell a CEO, listen, you better listen to me on this?
Honestly, nothing that intuitively comes to my mind, but I think the general rules still apply. Just before I kind of answer that, to take off what Sanjeev also earlier said, for us also, this whole reputation piece manifests itself with regards to partners who give us content. So to the previous discussion, again, trust becomes a very important conversation. But to kind of now answer the question you posed, honestly, I think the toolkit remains the same, which is, I think first level interaction with all stakeholders is a very important facet of being honest and truthful. And I think overall, if you're a grounded individual, I think that pretty much comes to you automatically. There are no separate tricks in my mind.
I think Samir just walked into my trap. He mentioned content partners, and as a journalist, I'd forgotten. Only day before, I think I was tweeting something funny on Daily Hunt because I saw your algorithms pick up one of the fake news kind of sites. So choosing who you go to bed with on your app is quite important. Is there any hygiene check that you would recommend for a bank, for a brand up front, so that tomorrow you do not face like a Zomato-like problem? Or
honestly, for us, it doesn't matter purely because from a content relationship point of view, we only worked with branded partners. So today, partners such as EBP, such as HT, are our partners that come to us directly. But from what I would recommend that when brands get on to digital, it's important that they work with trusted publishers only, because today it's very serious that, we don't know ad networks are serving what, where, and where your ad is actually being seen. So from that context, it's very important to work with the right set of partners, and something that we strongly recommend that all brands do before they get on board.
Okay. Let me change the tack a bit to Raj. In terms of, let's say, a crisis, if if one of your clients were to face a crisis in the new age and you think the CEO had a role to play, how do you do that? Give me an example or two you might have.
I'll give you a very recent example. He's not a client, but there's a cricket series going on in Australia. Mm-hmm. And we won the great match in Adelaide, and we were like all kicked about it. And
are you sure? Which we are you talking about? You're still Indian, Raj?
Yes, well, this is the beauty about Australia, that you could live there for 20 years, you could still have the Indian flag up there. Yeah, so that my kids go there because Australia is made up of all different cultures. And I remember when Italy won the World Cup, there was a streets full of blue. And the premier, the chief minister of that place, was walking with the Italian migrants. So it's good that way. It's very unique, very unique. But then when Australia is playing England, we vouch for Australia. So,
That's not difficult to guess.
yeah, so coming
Otherwise, you'll be burnt to ashes.
back... yeah. Look, I mean, I love the place, but then I also love India. And they've asked me this previously, who do you have to choose? I said, look, why do I have to choose? Why can't you just love both places?
Anyway, let's focus on that.
Yeah, focus on the question is that recently there's a Sydney Morning Herald has just been taken over by Channel 9, and there's Fox Sports, and they came out with a quote which was made by Harsha Bhogle, who is a veteran commentator. He's very well respected, both sides of the continent, and they distorted that completely. And the whole article was written against what he had said. And what he did, Mr. Bhogle, he went and he just, this is what I said from that Twitter handle. And as soon as he said that, there were people supporting that, and these guys had to go on a defense. Now, answering your question, CEOs or any principal, head of a company, they just have to be honest. And Sanjeev and Samir both mentioned that if you are transparent and you just say, look, we goofed up, we need your help, and we are sorry, and we'll make up for it. You know, a lot of pressure just goes away. And I think that is the key. And the other one is approachability. Because, you know, you call up a phone number and nobody picks up, and then this just keeps penting up. And then by the time this is just got so escalated that the thing can go out of hand. So you got to act quick, and you have to take it on your chin.
Sanjeev, one more tough question for you then. You walked into, because he asked that, okay. You know, I'm tempted to compare Maruti Suzuki with Mahindra, because both are competing in the automobile space, and Anand Mahindra is a handsome face up there, and you have slightly soft-spoken Japanese CXOs out there. Is that a challenge for a brand person? Are you at a disadvantage, or do you still love, let your work do the talk? I mean, is there some change in Maruti?
We let our customers buy the cars, and that speaks the volumes. The customers make the choice. But I just want to add, before the time runs out, something on the trick that you said. I think in today's world, which is so tech-driven, and there's so much of technology that's around, people today have, like we were discussing, you know, actual presence and a virtual presence. I think for a CXO to really be successful, he has to be sure that the virtual is like a mirror to the real. Unless that happens, there is somebody sitting there to troll, somebody sitting there to put a nail on it, and somebody's waiting to amplify such news. But if you're transparent, you're just the way you are, then things are just fine.
Yeah, let me throw at Samir a question. In the light of this, in the virtual world, you saw what happened to Sundar Pichai recently. You know, he's faced two major challenges, which from a point of view of two disparate stakeholders spells a new challenge for the brand. One are the employees, the other is, let's say, parliamentarians in the age of, you know, yesterday, I think Sundar Pichai had to answer questions on why do you get a picture of Donald Trump when you Google idiot. And 2 weeks ago, there was a walkout in the Google offices worldwide because of the Me Too related pushbacks. We had Vineet Nair of HCL write a book called Employees First, Customers Later, which I thought was a revolutionary slogan because we always grew up thinking customer is a king. So in the new age, Samir, do you think the approach of the CEO towards employees has to be different? And if so, how does one work the tightrope? You know, do you give the employees the bad news that customers are king? Or do you listen to the employees and go and tell the customers, look, this is where we stop, go ahead, or investors? I mean, I want you to think about a new age CEO for whom it's about a new age employee.
You know, luckily...
I'm sorry, I have to do my bit here. We quickly have one comment and then we have
Yeah, sure, that's the last line anyway. I've got 2 more minutes, I thought.
It's all over, actually. We're going into like extra
So-
time,
so
but it's okay, we can
I
have.
started
quick
at 3
comments.
and it's 3:25, already cut it back by 40 minutes. Let me sound like TV channel and raise hands. You know?
Okay, honestly, I've had the luxury of working with a new age CEO like Umang, who's the erstwhile head of Facebook India. And I think what Umang successfully demonstrates is honestly employees first. It's always them first, because if he speaks to us, I think he's covered 90% of the bases. Then it's, along with that, an active disposition towards listening to the customers. These two, I think, are the two sets that you need to manage first. Because if employers are happy and customers are happy, I'm sure as a byproduct or as a lag indicator, investors and corporate results are always happy.
Okay, we're done. Sanjeev already spoken on workers and how they handled it. Anything you want to say on employees in the new age, Raj?
It's simple.
Yeah.
Statement to your question, you can't be a Don Quixote going to the war.
Sorry?
You can't be a Don Quixote going to the war and not look at the back.
Okay.
You have to keep the back in mind. You have to keep the forces with you to win the war.
Okay.
And I'll just end there. The employees, you really have to have on the same page the philosophy you follow, the philosophy the company has, and your employees have to follow the same. And this can only happen when they know each other well.
Okay, thank you,
All right.
gentlemen. Thank you everyone for this wonderful, insightful session. Can we have a huge round of applause for all of them, please? Please stay on stage, gentlemen. I would like to call on stage Mr. Karan Bhatia, Director, Strategic Relationships, Business World, and Consultant, exchange4media, to give away token to our speakers. We can actually give a huge round of applause. Thank you, everyone. Let's have one group picture.